this video, I want to give you the opportunity to expand your thinking by considering something that it's very likely you've never heard before. This is straightforward and understandable information. And if you have questions, please leave them in the comments and I'll answer them. I grew up in churches and I had questions. My questions were usually ignored, or I was told to wait for God's return before I could actually get an answer. One of my questions was about the event referred to in the Bible as the Abomination of Desolation. I don't know if this is the universal church understanding of the event, but I've heard it enough times to believe that it is a widely accepted interpretation of what the event will be. Growing up, I was led to believe that the coming abomination of desolation is a pagan leader sacrificing a pig or something profane to his god on the altar in a rebuilt temple in the city of Jerusalem. Because of this widely accepted belief, many Christians are eagerly awaiting the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, mainly to serve as a sign that we are in the end times. I had a few problems with this interpretation. One, according to John, 1 John, chapter 2, verse 18, the prophesied end times began roughly 2,000 years ago. For some clarification, see my video, Never Be Confused About the Book of Revelation Again. Basically, the prophesied end times began when the Messiah ascended to heaven after his crucifixion and resurrection. Second, if you've been waiting for a temple to be built in Jerusalem, then you've been misled about how the end times will play out. For one thing, you need to realize that according to the Bible, you are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwells within you. That understanding should place the location of the abomination of desolation in its proper setting. So, if you don't know that you are the temple of God, then there's been a miscommunication between you, God, or your religious leader. Another aspect of the end times that most Christians have been confused about is the timeline. Now, although the final 3.5-year period may be the most trying, the prophesied times, and half a time actually covers many hundreds of years, seeing that the four metals of Daniel's interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 through 45, and the interpretation given to Daniel in Daniel chapter 7, verses 15 through 28 of the four beasts, state plainly that the metals and the four beasts represent four empires, not individual men. Those four empires exist on the earth from Daniel's day up until God destroys the final world empire and establishes his eternal kingdom. For more clarification, I recommend watching my videos, Never Be Confused About the Bible Again, Never Be Confused About the Book of Revelation Again, and Adam and the Lion Den. The short version is, the time is the time of Jacob's trouble. The times are the times the nations are Gentiles. The divided time is the period referred to in the Bible as the Abomination of Desolation. There's a few tools we need before moving on. You need to, at the very least, recognize that Genesis chapter 1 and 2 are two distinct eras in the biblical narrative. Adam, the man who was formed by the hand of Yahweh Elohim in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, was formed as the physical representation of God on earth. Another tool that we need is to recognize Genesis chapter 1:1 through Genesis chapter 2:4a as the image of Adam's and of your and my internal heavenly kingdom. We also need to recognize that the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7 is not only the empire that is in power during the prophesied end times, but is also the empire who implements the final abomination of desolation before Yahweh Elohim intervenes and destroys this fourth world ruling empire and ushers in his eternal kingdom. A final and critical tool to have is a better understanding of the events that took place at the Tower of Babel and why the men who were building the tower had their languages confused and then were dispersed around the world. The common focus that I have heard regarding why the men were dispersed is because they had offended God by building a tower up to heaven. But the tower wasn't the reason that the languages were confused, the people were scattered. If the tower had gotten too tall, the wind and gravity could have easily taken care of that. No, the people were scattered for the desire to establish their own identity, apart from the identity established by Yahweh Elohim when he created Adam. The men in Babel stated in Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, "And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered upon the face of the whole earth." Now, it's not obvious, but this is a rejection of the identity that Yahweh Elohim had established. The people were essentially declaring themselves to be the founders of their own existence, their own creators, their own cause in God. By default, anyone outside of their group could not be. Taking the understanding one step further, they were ordaining themselves with a right, the right to define the identity of man. And though their plan could not be executed in their day, we do see it put into action by Daniel chapter 7's fourth beast, and practiced in the modern day by European nations who were given their charters by their respective kings and the European Christian church establishment to spread around the entire world and take possession of physical bodies, human rights, personal property, national lands and resources, and to disseminate the image of the idol God created in their own likeness, and subsequently to establish tiers of value for humanity, with the darker, heavily melanated skin being considered as having the least value, least intelligence, and least potential, and the paler skin considered to be closest to the likeness of the God which they had created. A quick example or experiment would demonstrate what I'm saying. When I say the name Jesus, what image comes to your mind? Now, bypassing the fact that the ancient Hebrews didn't utilize a J sound in their language and would have been unfamiliar with the term Jesus, most people imagine a European man when they hear that name. Even though the Bible describes the ancient Israelites and Judeans as resembling the ancient Egyptians. The indigenous Egyptians were dark-skinned Africans who originated in the Sudan and who came up to the Delta region when the swamps began to dry. Despite the fact that the issue of the identity of the ancient Egyptians was resolved in 1974 at the UNESCO conference that was held specifically to address the question about the identity of the Aboriginal Egyptians. These ancient founders are still portrayed in movies and depicted in magazines as pale-skinned Europeans or even as Arabs. The Egyptians that you see on television today are the descendants of the Arabs who invaded Egypt in the 7th century of the modern era. In summary, the ancient Egyptians were, in reality, dark-skinned Africans. And therefore, the ancient Israelites and Judeans who looked exactly like the ancient Egyptians were also dark-skinned Africans. Now, with our toolbox in hand, let's get to work. The abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet follows a pattern. There are two other events in the Bible that were so abominable, so debilitating, that existence on the earth was changed by God himself. Each one of the previous abomination of desolation events directly affected the man created as the likeness of God, but residually affected all of mankind in every aspect of the created order. The first desolating abomination occurred in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve ate the fruit from the tree of knowledge and good and evil. This action ended not only that existence, but separated the spirit of man from the spirit of God and ended that relationship. Life on earth was forever changed. Now, the second desolating abomination occurred when the sons of God mingled with not only human women, but all flesh, and had children by them. This action polluted the soul of man by introducing perversion and strange relations into the masculine and feminine characteristics of the human psyche. This action resulted in God ending that world by bringing the flood. The third and final abomination of desolation is an attack on the third level of man's genetic order, the physical temple of God, man's physical body. Now for some context. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. This is the last paragraph of the 70-week prophecy. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. When you read Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, it should be clear that this event is not a single instance of some terrible act. The abomination of desolation is the entire time period that the Bible refers to as the half a time. According to Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, in the midst of the week, the abomination of desolation is established and continues until all is complete. God is the one who determines the end before establishing his eternal kingdom. Now you can read in Revelation chapter 14, verses 14 through 16, that the Son of Man is told to reap his harvest. Soon after this rapture event, the wrath of God is poured out. Now backtracking a bit, if you're saying to yourself that the time times half a time is only a 3.5-year period, you need to watch my other videos to get caught up to speed. Biblical prophecy has both short-term and long-term application. While the short-term application of the prophesied times, and half a time may be 3.5 years, the application more relevant to people living on the earth at this moment is much longer and encompasses the time of Jacob's trouble, the times of the nations/Gentiles, and the half a time, also known as the abomination of desolation. The effects of all three occurrences continue to resonate down throughout history from the very moment of each of their inceptions. The effects of each instance of the abomination of desolation, first and foremost, affects the relationship between God and man. Secondly, the event affects the relationship between man and man. We can read in Genesis chapter 3, verse 23, that Adam, this is the separation between God and Adam, was driven out of the garden and away from Yahweh Elohim's presence. We can read, and this is the struggle between man and man. We can read in Job 31, verses 33 through 34, that Adam hid away out of fear and shame from the multitudes and from families. So again, the separation between God and man and man. Now, the result of the second abomination of desolation, we can read in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, that God, or Yahweh, declared that his spirit would not always interact in the affairs of man. And then we can read in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, the separation between man and man, that the thoughts of every man's heart was only evil continually. In each instance, man became a servant of a being other than God. First, under the serpent, a spiritual corruption took hold. That was followed by the subjugation to the sons of God and the corruption of man's soul. The final abomination of desolation, under the subjugation of the fourth beast, is the attack on our flesh. Man is further separated from God and is also placed in servitude under the fourth beast, the fourth and final human empire. In this physical desolation, the glory, reverence, and fear of God has been reduced to the image of a European man. The pinnacle of the physical desolation are the abominable acts of European colonialism, human trafficking, and chattel slavery. Now, chattel slavery, if you're not familiar with the term, is basically when you're turning humans into things, property. You may say that slavery is an ancient institution, to which I respond, no. Other forms of servitude had standards for the masters as well as the slaves. No other form of human servitude robbed a man of their human identity. No other robbed man of their name, their language, their family history and culture. No other legalized rape, murder, and human experimentation. No other condoned the selling of their own children born from illicit relationships, nor condoned sodomy, child molestation, or forced incest to produce workers. No other attached the label of inhuman to entire populations of men, women, and children because they had melanated skin. So, a final thought. The earth and all life on earth depends on sunlight to exist. If not for the sun, and if not for melanin, humanity never would have came into existence on the earth. In truth, the first man to exist on the earth, the man who was formed by the hand of Yahweh Elohim to be the likeness of God, was a very heavily melanated, dark-skinned individual. This one is the Son of God. Every man born after this one man or woman is the Son of Man. So you may say that, again, slavery is taking place all over the world. But the dehumanization of human beings, making the fathers and mothers of civilization servants, that's new. Robbing them of their identity, that's new. And even today, in this modern day, 2025, there's a scale where you can see Africans or, men and women with melanated skin in America or South America killed or incarcerated or beaten. And there's a numbing, there's it happens kind of thought to it. Whereas when you see a European, whether they're in America or in Europe or, in Africa or throughout the world, when they're killed or, in a dangerous situation, it has a bigger impact. The news covers it, differently. People respond differently. Just the value of life is seen differently depending on how dark or how light your skin is. That's created over time. That's something that's been institutionalized, where men and women aren't just seen as men and women. There's a scale. There's different tiers of how much value we attribute depending on how close you are to the perception of God. And again, the perception of God was created by this image of a European male. So the closer you are to that, the more valuable you are, the more reliable you are, the more intelligent you are perceived to be, in that system of understanding. And the darker your skin is, the further away from God, intelligence, culture, civilization, and potential you're perceived to have. So that's the new thing. And that disregard for life, disregard for, humanity, that is the abomination of desolation, that we've been conditioned, again, to see godliness in a European form. And everything else falls short of that. Now, if you like the video, the information is helpful, please leave your comments. And if not, if you have any objections or you say, no, that's too far off, it can't be that, please, again, leave your comments down below. Thank you for watching.